Years after the events of the first movie, Lydia Deetz hosts a talk show called Haunted House about the supernatural. She's been a medium for over 15 years, but even she is amazed by what happened on a farm. The screen shows footage from her investigation when suddenly the studio lights flicker and Lydia sees Beetlejuice's ghost. She screams in fear and her boyfriend, Rory, the producer, calls for a break. An actress dressed as a corpse tries to calm her, and Lydia blames it on being tired, apologizing to her fiancé. Their conversation is interrupted by a message from her stepmother, Delia, urgently asking her to come. Lydia rushes to Delia's gallery, where her stepmother tells her about her father Charles's death. He was returning from a bird-watching expedition when his plane crashed into the ocean. Charles survived, swam, and held onto a piece of the wing until a shark appeared. Lydia can't believe it happened and wonders how to break the news to her daughter Astrid, who is already a very gloomy girl. You may remember her from another series that came out a couple of years ago. Their relationship is strained, and Astrid doesn't always answer when her mother calls. While Lydia and Delia talk, one of the workers steps outside and gets hit by a car. He wakes up in a corridor, greeted by a ghost who guides him to start cleaning. Suddenly, new containers begin sparking with electricity and break open, revealing a woman's body parts that start moving towards each other. She staples herself back together, turning into a dark-haired beauty. The spirit tries to stop her, but she demands to know Beetlejuice's location and then drinks the ghost's soul. Meanwhile, at school, Astrid is mocked by classmates who call her mom a fraud. She ignores her mother's call as Lydia and Delia drive to pick her up from school for her grandfather's funeral. Delia decides to speak to her granddaughter in front of everyone. Although Astrid tries to avoid it, she ends up going along. In the underworld, Beetlejuice is still feeling sad over Lydia, remembering their almost wedding. He tells a ghost with a shrunken head named Bob that Lydia definitely saw him last time he appeared. Just then, he's called back up, and Beetlejuice takes off. He sits in the waiting room where newcomers are checked in, and Jackson, head of security, keeps an eye on troublemakers. Jackson talks to Beetlejuice, who admits to doing all the stunts himself until a fake grenade turned out to be real. Jackson is investigating the arrival of a strange lady, and Beetlejuice's eyes pop out at the sight of her. He claims he doesn't know her, but Dolores has written his name on the wall in the waiting area and seems to be looking for him. Jackson advises Beetlejuice to find a good hiding spot. Meanwhile, the Deetz family arrives at the funeral in Winter River. After the service, Lydia and Astrid remember Astrid's father, Richard, whom Lydia divorced 2 years before he disappeared in South America. But Lydia doesn't see his ghost, which angers Astrid, confirming her suspicions that her mom is faking her abilities. Meanwhile, in the underworld, half of Charles Deetz's body enters a shop, but the shopkeeper sends him to the waiting area. However, he soon notices Dolores hiding among a pile of dresses, draining the shopkeeper's soul. She then grabs a wedding dress, turning it black with a touch of her hand. At the same time, Beetlejuice is telling Bob about his love story and marriage. He met Dolores back in the days of the plague, when he was a humble grave robber and fell for her gaze. They performed a wedding ritual, drinking each other's blood and twisting the heads off 2 chickens. But it turned out Dolores was the leader of a soul-sucking cult. By the end of the night, she poisoned him by putting poison in his wine. But in his last moments, Beetlejuice cut her into pieces with an axe. Now, she's back. By the way, you probably know that Beetlejuice 2 is a direct sequel to the first movie. But when did the first movie come out? In what year did it debut? Let us know in the comments. Meanwhile, Charles's memorial service is held in Winter River. Rory tries to talk to Astrid, but she doesn't believe he's sincere and suspects he's using her mother. Delia greets guests, including a realtor who dreams of selling a haunted house. Suddenly, Rory asks everyone for their attention and proposes to Lydia, suggesting they get married on Halloween. Delia is shocked, thinking a memorial is an inappropriate time for a proposal, but Rory believes it's fitting, given the family's unique views on death. Lydia, not wanting a scene, accepts the proposal. Upset, Astrid rides her bike aimlessly until she falls onto someone else's property. A boy spots her, asks if she's okay, and shows her a book, Crime and Punishment. Astrid impresses him by knowing Dostoevsky well. He invites her into his treehouse and they talk about their families. The boy is amazed to learn that her mom is Lydia Deetz and surprised that Astrid only believes in science and facts. Meanwhile, in the underworld, Dolores searches for Beetlejuice, draining the souls of ghosts along the way. Beetlejuice in turn makes the Headless wear striped suits, hoping to trick his ex. Suddenly, he sees a newspaper notice about Charles's death and realizes this could make it easier to reach Lydia. Back at the memorial, the house's residents hear Delia's loud wails as she tries to capture the sound of pure grief. Rory jokes about ghosts, and Lydia mentions the Maitlands, who used to live in the attic after their deaths, but have since moved on. Lydia and Astrid go up to the attic, where Astrid examines a model of the town, finds a guidebook for the recently deceased, and a family photo album. Lydia shares that Astrid was born during a horror festival she attended with her father. Suddenly, Astrid picks up a flyer with Beetlejuice's name and says it once before Lydia stops her. Still, Astrid says the name again and runs off. Lydia tells Delia about it all. Later, while Astrid is on her way to see Jeremy, he introduces her to his parents. She's surprised by their collection of old records and a similar guidebook for souls. But Jeremy explains he got everything from a neighbor's yard sale. She talks about how she and her father dreamed of traveling before he disappeared in the Amazon and confides that she thinks her mom is a fraud. Jeremy invites her to come over on Halloween, knowing her mom will be busy with her wedding. Rory tells Lydia he ordered her a wedding dress, but she asks him to keep things low-key. Suddenly, music comes from the model town, and Lydia demands Beetlejuice leave her life. Rory is surprised, and Lydia explains about the demon, but he thinks it's all fantasy and says Beetlejuice is named 3 times. The two find themselves inside the model town and then fall into the underworld, landing in Beetlejuice's office. He seals Lydia's mouth and rambles about a child who appears beside her. Lydia rips off the tape and says home 3 times, bringing them back to the attic. Rory, waking up, thinks it was a nightmare. Delia shows Astrid 2 snakes she plans to use for an eternal love ritual at her husband's grave, convinced they're harmless. Lydia tells her daughter she's going back to school, but Astrid asks to stay for Halloween, saying she's made a friend. Lydia agrees and drops her off at Jeremy's house. Noting the odd appearance of the place, Jeremy greets Astrid, admiring her Marie Curie costume, and gives her a kiss. Astrid realizes she's floating near the ceiling and figures out that Jeremy is a ghost. He admits he died 23 years ago, and she's the only one who can see him. Jeremy asks for her help to come back to life, showing her instructions from a book and promises that she could see her dad again. Meanwhile, the realtor tells Lydia that Jeremy killed his parents and died when the police tried to arrest him. Alarmed, Lydia rushes to Jeremy's house just as her daughter says the spell and, along with Jeremy, steps through a doorway to the underworld. Lydia arrives just as the door slams shut in front of her. At the cemetery, Delia starts her ritual, but the snakes turn out to be venomous and bite her. Lydia runs to the attic and calls Beetlejuice. He explains that Astrid swapped lives with Jeremy and will stay in the underworld unless she's sent on the train to eternal rest. Lydia begs him to help, and Beetlejuice agrees, but only if she marries him. This will let him stay in the mortal world and avoid his ex. Lydia agrees and signs the contract. Beetlejuice opens a hole between the worlds of the living and the dead. Jackson discovers that Beetlejuice has brought a living person into the afterlife and starts a hunt for him. Meanwhile, Delia wakes up in the waiting room and realizes she's dead. Jeremy brings Astrid to the station to put her on the train to eternal rest. He laughs, explaining she swapped lives with him and will be stuck there forever. The police take Astrid away, while Jeremy waits to get his pass stamped. At this moment, Astrid sees her dad. Meanwhile, Beetlejuice and Lydia also arrive at the lively station. Astrid tries to escape, but is pulled toward the train. Lydia sees her, catches up, and pulls her out. But Jackson's trackers spot them. Mother and daughter run and escape through a portal to Saturn's moon, Titan, where they're attacked by a sandworm. Richard saves them, pulling them back to the station. He asks them to stop arguing and leads them toward the exit to the living world. Meanwhile, Jackson catches Bob and tries to find out where Beetlejuice is, forgetting that Bob can't speak. Delia, refusing to accept her death, summons Beetlejuice to help her find Charles. He agrees if she helps him find his runaway bride. Dolores reaches the police station, finds Bob, and drains his soul. Lydia, Richard, and Astrid see Jeremy about to get his pass stamped. He taunts Astrid as the official marks his papers, but it turns out to be Beetlejuice, who sends Jeremy straight to hell. Lydia and Astrid find themselves outside the church where the wedding is about to start. Beetlejuice arrives with Delia and interrupts the ceremony, using a truth serum on Rory, who then confesses he never believed in Lydia's abilities and only used her for money. Lydia kicks him out and Beetlejuice makes the bloggers and journalists suck into their phones. He dresses Lydia in a red wedding gown and invites her to dance. Everyone starts singing in his voice without understanding why. A wedding cake rolls into the church and the couple rises toward the ceiling in a dance while Jackson's team surrounds the building. As they prepare to arrest him, Beetlejuice freezes them, but then Dolores shows up, ready for revenge. While she argues with her ex-husband, Astrid opens a portal, summoning the sandworm from Titan. Beetlejuice directs it toward Dolores and Rory, and they're swallowed by the creature. Astrid points out that since Beetlejuice brought Lydia into the afterlife illegally, their marriage contract is void. Lydia says his name 3 times, sending him back to the underworld. Delia says goodbye to her loved ones and returns to the afterlife with Jackson, reuniting with Charles's spirit as he prepares to board the Soul Train. With everything finally settled, Lydia closes her show haunted house to spend more time with her daughter. They go on a journey where Astrid meets a boy, marries him, and a happy grandmother is present at the birth. Suddenly, a tiny Beetlejuice-like creature emerges from Astrid's womb, but it's only a nightmare. And Lydia realizes the demon will never stop being obsessed with her. It may seem like this sequel was made just for the money, but Burton remains Burton. The magical soundtrack plays and the cast gives it their all. So let's look forward to a third part. After all, you have to say the hero's name 3 times.